Going back, page 123. The challenges pushing us most urgently are related issues of demographic explosion, poverty, and drugs. The threat to the environment, genetic manipulation, and arms proliferation. Now, these are problems for them, the bankster, and everybody in their system. These are the global threats to them, the global planners. These are not our problems. I mean, you could say they are our problems, but they're not really our problems, because our problems are like more like individual rights, freedom, and so forth, prosperity, and a system that promotes prosperity, not a system that imposes limits, which is what he's going to describe now. I'm going to try to be quick about it. We are far from fully understanding the implications of these problems. Solving them will require leaders who are prepared to accept an unpopular abandonment of sovereignty. And that doesn't mean national sovereignty only, it means individual sovereignty, as we have seen since 9/11 happened very clearly. So people must protect themselves from themselves. Stop thinking of themselves as the proprietors of the world and of the species, and recognize that at last that man is only a tenant. Notions of sanctuary and stewardship and the sacred must become the slogans that underpin a global program of survival. So that's what I said, the global program of so-called survival. The sky is falling, COVID is falling, we're all gonna die. So anyway, so we must resist the perverse logic of the culture of choice, because the culture of choice says the people have the right to decide their future, but no, these banksters and their minions understand the problems better, you see. So no, you should not have any individual rights or even collective rights. They should have all the rights to decide your future. That's the proper way, the noble way, the right way. So Mr. Lebowski has written has written of the grave peril that humanity risks when it abandons the sacred. Culture, when it loses its sacred sense, loses all sense. With the disappearance of the sacred, which imposed limits to the perfection that could be attained by the profane, arises one of the most dangerous illusions of our civilization. The illusion that there are no limits to the changes that human life can undergo, that society is an endlessly flexible thing, and that to deny this flexibility and this perfectibility is to deny man's total autonomy, and thus to deny man himself. So he's saying that we should not dream too big, or at least dream in a way that threatens them. The utopia of man's perfect autonomy and the hope of unlimited perfection may be the most efficient instruments of suicide ever to have been invented by human culture. To reject the sacred is to reject our own limits. It is also to reject the idea of evil. So like I said before, it's a very complicated paragraph, full of multiple ideas strung together to promote his idea that we're just in a perverse culture, so we can't do anything right for ourselves. So we have to let Atali and all the organization he supports and funds through his bank decide our future for us. Because they're just not smart enough, you see. And unfortunately, I tend to agree with his conclusion that people can decide what's best for them. As long as they continue living in the illusion of the media, it's going to continue this way, Anyway, I'll be right back after a quick smoke break. And I'll try to play some of my music in the background while I take my break. Okay, so I'm trying to find a song that's more in line with this international things. That one was cool, I suppose. Oh, this is cool. Some counter propaganda. Uh-oh. Why isn't it working? Oh shit, I gotta fix the sound now. Somehow. Let's be wise to what they planet. Let's put Humpty back together again. The problems that will plague millennial man require that we restore the idea of evil, the idea of sacred, to the center of political life. So Bill Clinton getting caught for a BJ and politicians getting in trouble for dick pics, that's all part of this agenda of bringing the sacred to the center of political life. Unfortunately, it looks so disgusting and vile, but that's what you expect from these people. We must define world standards in a democratic way so that they may evolve in a manner that people everywhere will find acceptable. Okay, so one world value system to evolve the culture of immediacy that he talked about. The institutions of the United Nations were not designed for this mission. They have neither the means nor the mandate. They must move to a higher level of international organization by becoming they must move to a higher level of international organization by becoming institutions with a truly supranational authority, a genuine planetary political power that can impose standards in the areas in which the survival of the human species is at stake. So that's true. The United Nations did become more powerful in the 90s and 2000s, and even after that. So all of this is very true. All of this has become true. Few countries will easily accept such a transfer of power. I do not underestimate the difficulty of gaining the democratic adherence of such a scheme in a world of 7 or 8 billion people, with 5 billion below the level of survival. In its embryonic form, a regular summit meeting of heads of state representing the nations of the different continents may foreshadow such institutions and clarify some of the needed standards. So I just want to comment on this, that some of the biggest tyranny that we experienced around the time when we were paying attention, which was Bush and when Obama was getting elected, we noticed that the most heavily patrolled and fascist kind of events that ever took place in this country were the ones where these international people were meeting, like at the G8 convention and so forth, or the the National American Union thing. At these kind of events, especially the G8 though, there was whole military units, out in the streets and wearing their black military gear, head to toe, looking like Star Wars, but in black. And the people were just protesting, but it was just scary to see that there were so many people protesting, and they were so scared that they had all these military right there, because these were the big dogs all together, discussing plans on how to put us in more efficient slavery. So yeah, that was interesting. So everything is coming true, or has become true. International authority and institutions seem indispensable in at least 5 crucial areas. So these are the big problems for the big dogs. Malnutrition, which is engineered, by the way. Toxic gases, all planned. Genetic engineering, all controlled by them. Armaments, all made by them. And drugs. The transportation is all controlled by them. And so is the force and violence that goes along with the drugs, or is allowed to go along with the drugs. So anyway, saving children, wow, from sickness and ignorance requires the establishment of international finance organizations that devise new forms of donations and aid. Saving the environment requires a world agency to assess damage already done, such as the ozone layer, and to establish standards of maximum allowable pollution, to measure deviations from such standards, and to aid poor countries in gaining access to technologies that will curtail and eventually eliminate pollutants of all kinds. So this we have seen with the United Nations doing this, and all the United Nations, yeah. So in other organizations with the pollution, and then saving the children. So International Finance Organization. I remember seeing the U.S. aid and other organizations that are international, even though they're based in the U.S. supposedly. But they're the international banking system, so they lend money to all these supposed poor countries to save kids. Protecting the human species requires the establishment of universal standards that will allow us to control medically aided procreation. Wow, how nice. So they'll tell us who can breed with whom. Prenatal diagnostics, so we can tell which kids are fit to survive and which are unfit. And genetic imprinting for the slaves, obviously. We must, I just talked in the last video about the whole microchimerism and the prima nocta connection. I don't know if that's what genetic imprinting is, but I think GMO is part of genetic imprinting for sure. So we must agree on the inviolability of the human body and of the individual, and upon respect for individual privacy. The structures of life, the embryo as well as the gene, must be declared to be the inalienable property of the entire species, not you or your family, no, the entire species, and be given an absolute sanctuary free from manipulation, even if doing so will mean refusing to care for or to correct a genetic defect. We must be vigilant in order to avoid any actions in any country that might cause irreversible genetic mutation. So I think they're doing that pretty well with the whole coronavirus thing, because that's basically a form of genetic manipulation, imposing mutation on your gene if you catch the virus. So everything he's saying is coming true, man. Or all his solutions, since he is the bankster who gives us the solutions by creating the funding the people who create the problems, and funding the propagandists who propose the solutions, or hype of the problem in a distorted way. Alright, before he talks about the gats, let me drop some shit to the raps, cause that's how I do it. Got some old beats, so I can get fluid with my flows, cause you know I'll get liquid with it, yo. I just drank some H2O, so I'm prepared. Smoked on the hydro, so I don't care. Ain't scared to get crazy with the flow, you see. So easy, like the breeze be blowing an Etiwan Deezy. For sheezy, my kneesy, I got the beat for thee. But it's only 20 seconds. So I gotta keep repping the click button on the laptop. It's burned out like some pot head. But I didn't smoke pot, I just worked a lot. A workaholic. Drinking on the beer got me in conflict with my parental units. Shit. So now I don't give a F it. I don't give a F it. Still dropping records, but not dropping beats. Cause you know that's a feat I need to relearn. Gotta get the Fruity Loops back up and burn some new beats and drop some new sheets. Musically, bass rhythms, that's me. QUAKE. Got you shaking in the seat, vibrating, you know, like you just got news from Satan. Got you shaking, sweating, panicking. We gotta be protecting ourselves, cause I just got stabbed the other day, yeah, hell. And they be banning our arms proliferation, so we can't protect ourselves in this declining nation from the early release convicts with a culture that is so nasty. But even the general population are so trashy. So I see, so I say. But hey, nation states will not disappear, Atali says. So let's go over here and read another paragraph today, or two. That's how I do. Protecting ourselves from worldwide arms proliferation will require the formation of a higher authority with democratically constituted powers. Such an authority will supersede bilateral negotiations, establish inventories, verify the application of agreements, and provide sanctions for violations. So yeah, these international authorities definitely did the sanctions, did the negotiations and agreements and all that. As much for chemical and biological and nuclear weapons as for more traditional arms. So United Nations is very concerned about Americans having, assault rifles. So not just at the national level, but at the individual level, these things are affecting us. Protecting ourselves from the scourge of drugs, or some drugs, the unauthorized drugs, will require international regulations aimed at excluding from the international financial community any institution that allows drug money to be laundered. And boy, they were serious about that drug money being laundered, because if you were, it was all about the money, because if you were found to be a drug distributor, they could seize all your assets, which is something any other crime they never do. So they really wanted that money, not to get to the people. That's what it seems. So, in addition, an international agency must provide support to those countries that need to convert economies that depend on drugs, and to their struggle against narcotics profiteers. So this is very important, because Latin America is heavily dependent on drugs, and it's very important for America to regulate that, and they've had many wars there to try to regulate that. Money. So it is not simple to imagine planetary institutions that are. It is not a struggle to imagine planetary institutions that are simultaneously efficient and democratic, particularly in these complicated and contentious areas. Existing international bodies demonstrate how quickly bureaucracy blunts the ability to carry out such grand objectives. Still, humanity would be remiss if it did not make the attempt. Nation states will not disappear, of course, even as the world becomes increasingly unified, even as technology and communications become universal and multinational corporations establish subsidiaries in every country. Governmental power will remain largely local. This will be all to the good for the banksters. Only states inside historically stable frontiers can assure democracy at the human scale. Well, currently we have mob rule. That's why we have fascism coming back. National governments will be assured of power in at least 3 areas. So those countries closest to the center of the dominant sphere must place priority on attracting investments that create jobs, industries, and services. Not just service economy, but jobs, industries, and services that will stimulate and sustain consumer demand. They will be responsible for obtaining or ensuring the creation of technologies that automate production as well as store and process information. So control of information is critical. National governments will be responsible for building the network of communications, port, train, cities, fiber optic, financial markets, so they can attract other elements necessary to consolidate a center. The fate of whole countries will rest on the location of an airport, the laying of tracks for high-speed trains, the sitting of industries dedicated to the manufacture and distribution of cultural images and products. Public budgets must be the principal means of financing these networks of prosperity. So, I think I'm going to come back to this later. The second idea is to ensure access to the new nomadic objects, just like the Obama phones. I think you can read all these yourself. So he says new technologies are critical for us to grow and evolve. So new ways change we can believe in. We have to have new ways of doing things. Redistribute resources so everyone can have a piece of the pie of the hyper-industrial world, even though in the previous chapter he said people won't be content in this new age and it'll be a hell on earth, worse than anything in the last century. New ways of doing things, blah blah blah. Social security, family assistance allowed women to become consumers. So too must the consumers of nomadic objects have some minimal income. That's why government is giving us those checks, so we have that minimal income so we can keep consuming. Allowances and student salaries will become institutionalized and decisively important. For a country, everything will depend on its ability to educate its citizens, so these objects are for adult education. So all countries that want to live in the good life, I guess, or want to succeed, need to welcome change, make creation a fundamental ambition. This is what the bully is telling you, you know? Invention a requirement, innovation a necessity. So that's why those 1/3 of Chinese students commit suicide or some crazy statistic like that, you know? Because these poor successful nations are really require sacrifice from their citizens. But unfortunately, all that slave driving doesn't allow new ideas to flourish so easily. That's why I guess there's a class system too. Especially under communism. Because communism is a deviant feminism to the extreme. And just like Dazed and Confused, we saw how the feminine psychopaths like to humiliate and control their underlings. But finally, nation states will differ according to the social project that they implicitly offer to their people. So for some nations, each citizen must have the right to human dignity. For some, it will be enough to allow each person the right to become rich. For others, it will be a right to a decent income, to housing, and to some power in the workplace. So he's talking about the different levels of demands for the different nations. It might have something to do with Wat, Pit, and Kapha, actually. So I think the bile humor prefers to have dignity. The phlegm humor wants to just become rich, decent income, housing, some power in the workplace. Anyway, each nation will search in its own way and according to its own traditions for a new equilibrium between order and disorder, between plenitude and poverty, between dignity and humiliation. And above all, a new sacred covenant must be struck between man and nature, so that the earth endures. They endure. So that the ephemeral gives way to the eternal, the gods up above. So that diversity resists homogeneity. Can't mix the lucky genes with the poor genes. Dignity must be supported over power, and creativity must substitute for violence. So they must devise new tricks to do the violence on the people and shackle them with substitutes of violence. And dignity must be supported over power. So respect for the white coats is the greatest, not for the black jackboots and their guns. That's what he's saying. In this new spirit, the wisdom of humanity and not just the intelligence of machines must be developed. Each person must have the means to... Alright, you can read this on your own later. Wow, actually. I'm on the last 2 pages now. Alright. Let me drop a flow, maybe I'll get more energy. Actually, I'm hungry. I gotta go. Because I'm starving, yo. Got the beef playing. So, some rhymes I'm saying. Got some trash on the floor, I ain't complaining. Because I got the smoke purification for the nose. And it blows in the air. But I ain't got nothing but a cigarette over here. I should smoke it because my lungs is cutting. Boy, to eat my dinner already. Got the best time before sunset. Ain't that right? Ayurvedic inside. Alright. Till next time in the night. Till the next video, the next episode, the last episode of the Millennium. Future for the coming world order in America, which is going through the death, or has already been killed. Its market form still cannot endure, because it is mixed with manure, importing Chinese produce and products coming from Walmart. That's what's up. I'm out. There is no doubt that this book is full of lies, things I despise. Indeed, we gotta keep it G. Trying to keep it 100. Hopefully I've reached 90. Because I ignored a few things I could have said. Because I just wasn't 100 on them. Yes. Yes. So free your mind. Peep the rhymes. Down at soundclick.com. Rap quick. Alright. Back to the lake of fire. Where you chasing your desires. In the new nomadic age of the millennial maze.